What's up, fantasy champions? Spotlight Sports Network is excited to tell you about an amazing deal from Thrive Fantasy, your place for daily fantasy sports and esports. Right now with promo code SS Network, Thrive Fantasy will match up to $50 of your first deposit. So go to thrivefantasy.com and sign up now with promo code SS Network. That's thrivefantasy.com, promo code SS Network. Do you like the Oakland A's? Are you a fan of the Golden Knights? Do you love the Los Angeles Chargers? Well then, my friend, you're in the right place. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show with your host, Jake the Snake SIlva, brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are live on a Tuesday night. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show. Wherever and however you may be watching and listening, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, and Twitch. Hoping all of you guys are having a great night. I appreciate every single one of you guys for hopping on. It's a really good night on a Tuesday night. We've got a lot of action going on, and of course, as well, that's happening on our networks. If you guys are diehard basketball fans, we got the Sixers game with our good friend Key in the building. She's going to be covering live play-by-play as well for the Sixers game. If you guys want to, definitely tune in for that. But I've got a lot to talk about here on this Tuesday night because, listen, there's been a lot of things that's been happening, at least in the NFL. And one that I really want to get into for one particular team, because some of us are kind of feeling like we're a little bit uncertain here, but I'm going to tell you this right now, and it deals with a particular team that even in the weakest division, this team did everything that they possibly could in free agency for this particular reason. So the New York Giants, as we mentioned, they were busy all throughout the free agency. I mean, they go and get a Dory Jackson. They go and get Kyle Rudolph. They go and get Kenny Golladay. There's a reason that the Giants ended up getting all of these players and the reason that they ended up spending this much in free agency. It's not because of the fact of they're pissed off at the Philadelphia Eagles, the fact that they knocked them out of the playoffs and sat Jalen Hurts for Nate Sudfeld, and the Washington football team ended up going forward. That's not the reason. The reason is very simple with the Giants. It's go time for Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones, we've had a lot of different concerns with him. And granted, he's a really good kid. It's a good quarterback. I don't think anybody can mistake it. He was a guy that caught our eyes when we watched him in preseason. He's also another guy that I thought could be the difference maker because, let's be honest, the Giants were coming off of Kerry Collins. They then go and trading to go in and getting Eli Manning. And Eli was not the most winningest quarterback, but he's got 2 Super Bowls. And New York needed juice and they needed fresh new blood. Daniel Jones, they pick him at number 6 out of Duke, out of a small program that's been famously known for basketball. And Daniel Jones, since the time he started in his rookie year, caught us all by surprise. We thought this was going to be a kid that was really going to be lights out in his second year. But here's the problem. Daniel Jones can't hold on to a football. That's one of the hardest things that you have to look at with this. But the Giants now, they're loaded up. And I was really concerned with their defense for one, because they got rid of a lot of players. Janoris Jenkins, Eli Apple, they got rid of Prince Amukamara. They got rid of a lot of really good pass rushers. But Leonard Williams, he's back with the team. There's a couple of real good pass rushers. I'm sure they're going to address that in the draft. But Adoree Jackson and a couple of other real good players, this is really good for the Giants. This has been good news for the Giants, but this is where Daniel Jones has to prove it. He has to. Because at this point, you're getting Kenny Golladay as your true number one. You've got Darius Slayton. You've got Sterling Shepard. There's some real good wide receiver options for you. Now, I think they could go and get themselves at least another running back for Saquon Barkley. But then you also have Kyle Rudolph with Evan Ingram. You've got a real good duo set. And the offensive line is only going to get better from here. But for Daniel Jones, it's go time. This is not the time where they got to slack off. This is not the time where they're going to miss the playoffs in the weakest division in football. Because let's be honest, the Philadelphia Eagles, by the way, they just signed Joe Flacco to a 1-year deal. So there clearly is quarterback competition, which I don't understand why. With Flacco and Jalen Hurts and Nate Sudfeld, this is a mess. This is a mess of a franchise. They lose Jalen Mills. They lose a bunch of real good key players. And the wide receiving core needs to get healthier and younger. But this is by far the weakest division in football. So the Eagles ain't even going to be worried about them. Dallas, however, Dak managed to work his magic to getting all that he wanted. He finally got the money he deserved and the contract, which is not super long, only 4 years. But you've got a lot of options to think about. Jalen Smith, DeMarcus Lawrence, Zeke, lots of these other contracts. And they're only getting better with their defense. They're finally addressing the problems that I have been announcing for months on end. Because the secondary was trash. It was horrible. The worst ones I've seen. And Trayvon Diggs, you can't develop him or build him in that type of secondary. You can't. So the Cowboys, they may be competitive, but let's just see how far that they go. And they have to fix their offensive line. And then finally, the Washington football team. Okay, they've got a surplus defense. Montez Sweat, Chase Young. They've got a lot of really good players. And then the offense, you're getting you're getting a lot of, you got a real good run game. You're also getting some good wide receivers. But as far as the quarterback position is concerned, because you're also looking at Ryan Fitzpatrick and Taylor Heineke. And a lot of people were raving about Taylor Heineke for a while. I think he's a good kid. Do I think he'll be good enough to even, be the all-time, the everyday starter in this roster? I don't know. I mean, he had his magic in the playoffs, but still, there's a lot I need to know about Taylor Heineke before I could even sell my stock on it. And then Ryan Fitzpatrick, I thought this team was going to end up maybe potentially going for a push for Russell Wilson or somebody up out there, because you are getting one of the most trustworthy coaches in Ron Rivera. So that's maybe the only competition that the Giants have is the Washington football team. But who knows about the Cowboys? And I'm done with the Philadelphia Eagles. But the Giants and Daniel Jones, it's go time. It's time to step this thing up a notch. And that's exactly what the Giants were doing throughout the offseason. I thought it was really good, but this is where they really have to step things up. All right. It's not like we ever get tired of talking about this team either, because and neither do we even get tired of really talking about Aaron Rodgers, because right now there have been a lot of teams that have been making noises in free agency. And there have been some that have lost some because of the cap. But the one team that has not made the noise is Green Bay. The Packers right now, they lost Corey Linsley, one of their star centers, to the Chargers. They then lost at least a couple of big-time players. They were so close to losing Aaron Jones that he took a franchise-friendly deal. They were so close to losing him. But to me, I felt like A.J. Dillon is clearly the guy that's going to have really good stuff. He's strong. He's a powerhouse type of back. I think he's going to be really, really good. But what are the Packers really doing for Aaron Rodgers to this point? Because here's what I was told. There are rumor reports that apparently the Packers are asking Aaron Rodgers with a restructure, a slight pay cut, so they could pay for players at free agency. Now, free agency was all like a frenzy last week. And then you got the draft coming up soon. So what the hell is Green Bay doing? Because up to this point, now you're asking Aaron Rodgers to be restructuring his deal and his pay cut. Even though, listen, there's nothing wrong with the coaching staff. Matt LaFleur knows his stuff. But when I look at this front office of this franchise, because there were a lot of big time players that were up out there, this is also a team that was not giving Aaron Rodgers a secondary wide receiver. This is also a team that was not giving Aaron Rodgers at least bits and pieces of defense. I mean, you let Blake Martinez walk. You let Corey Linsley walk. You're so close to losing Aaron Jones in the middle of it. And you can't even get at least a secondary wide receiver. It's interesting. But, the Packers, I mean, they'll be competitive. But for how long are you really going to keep this up? Because, again, this time is ticking right now for Aaron Rodgers when it comes to winning a championship. Only one Super Bowl on his belt. That's it. And the Packers have already made it to the NFC Championship game against Tampa. And they made it again to the 49ers, and they lost. It's clear that Matt LaFleur can coach. It's clear about that. But if you're not strengthening yourselves up to at least make the hump, make the push, what was once an NFC Championship could potentially be shorter than that. And that's one that I feel like for Green Bay is one that they really have to look at. Because, listen, I'm not worried about their division. I mean, the Lions, the Vikings, the Bears. I mean, Detroit is Detroit. But let's just see how Jared Goff really works with this offensive line, because they literally got nobody. Minnesota, you're only dealing with Kirk Cousins as much as you possibly can, but they're also working through their defense. And the Bears, they butcher yet again another quarterback. You're putting in all of your chips on specifically getting Russell Wilson. That didn't happen. They go and get Andy Dalton instead. Like, I don't know what the Bears are doing. And so, to me, the Packers will always be competitive in this North division. But when Aaron Rodgers is out, that's where things are going to start to get pretty dicey. And ultimately, if you're asking for this restructure, the only thing I feel like is because at least they will not be owing money at the end of it when they start Jordan Love. That's what I feel like with this particular move. And Green Bay this time is ticking. Because ultimately, if you don't have a secondary wide receiver, if you ain't filling up some of your spots, that's one that I feel like Green Bay is going to be in that hot seat. But the time is now. Because at this point, you've got Tampa being competitive. You've got a bunch of teams in the NFC that are willing to be competitive. And if Green Bay up to this point, if they are not picking up their slacks, that is one that I think could be very dangerous for them. Coming up next, so the Miami Dolphins. This is interesting. But the Miami Dolphins, there's a clear coat from here. I talked about this earlier before because I was talking about Alabama quarterbacks. But this is one that I feel like when it comes to the point of it, are we even sure about Tua? That's always been the question. Miami has a dilemma on their hands, but there are certain ways that they can make up for it. I'll explain for it coming up next. And of course, at the other portion of it, because this is one that I thought was really, really interesting. But I was talking about it in baseball with Turn 2 podcast earlier, just before I came onto the show. And there's one fan base. There's this fan base thing that is really, really strange to me. I'll explain it coming up next here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. All right, so for all of my fantasy gurus and all of my really good fantasy geeks about there, you guys love fantasy play. You guys love winning cold hard cash. There's an app for that called Thrive Fantasy. And Thrive Fantasy, you can download on your mobile device at Google Play in the App Store. You can also go online on your laptop or anywhere and go to thrivefantasy.com and go and play. The pool plays, you can win up to 15 grand in your pool play when you play on, and that's all sports, even esports, that you guys can be winning cold hard cash in every single pool play. When you sign up and you deposit $20 into your first pool play, Thrive Fantasy promises to match it when you use promo code SS Network. That's short for Spotlight Sports Network. So that when you use that promo code, they're going to match it to $50 into your first pool play once you end up putting in $20. What's going on, Marty? What's happening? But definitely check out thrivefantasy.com, promo code SS Network. That's thrivefantasy.com, promo code SS Network.
But I know that's just in my mind. I know everything is just in my mind. Do you really want to be famous? Do you really want to be a superstar? Do you really want to get dangerous? Do you even know where the groupies are? Bitches out here be-
Welcome to Hammer's house. Welcome to the My City, My Game pod show featuring Raider J77, your place for all things Raiders and all things Trailblazers. Brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Now let's go.
Like I said, folks, we got shows here on the Spotlight Sports Network. If you guys are diehard wrestling fans, definitely check out my good friend Malcolm Bean, a.k.a. Mal Gooley, in the Gooley Zone, where you can catch up on all wrestling content, and including all Chicago content, Chicago Bulls, Chicago Bears, Blackhawks, and Cubs. Check him out at Mal Gooley in the Gooley Zone. Also, check out My City, My Game with Raider J77 with all things Raiders and all things Trailblazers. For all you fans up out there, definitely check out My City, My Game. Also, check out my good friend who I just got off with on the Turn 2 podcast, one of my really good friends of mine and good co-hosts of the show. Definitely check out Jeff Hammer Hammond at Hammer's House for all of you diehard Raiders and Mets fans up out there for good quality content. And we'll also be discussing about UFC coming up this weekend. Also, check out Gangrene David at the Spotlight Sports Network for all of your diehard New York Jets content. Gangrene David, definitely check it out. So, you know, I never get sick about talking about this particular topic, for one, because the Dolphins right now have a dilemma. And here's what's interesting. Okay. Say, for instance, you're in this point, you know, you're basically have this situation in your hands. Okay. Think about this. Because one, you have a process that you're really trying to, you have a process that you're trying. And this goes from everywhere. This goes from the companies. I mean, think about it. You watch the stock markets almost all the time, right? And there's a process really to build upon it. Well, sometimes it depends on the processes. One, if the process is going to be successful, or if it's going to fail. This is a dilemma right now that's happening for the Miami Dolphins. Okay, and they feel like they're that company that when it comes to a project and when it comes to a potentiality, for their franchise to be competitive, and think about it, the AFC East is competitive. The Bills, we already know, are competitive. The Patriots spent money to going and filling in the holes that they need to, and they're going to address it into the draft again as well. And then you also have the New York Jets making moves. So this division is getting competitive, but it's more lopsided toward the Bills and the Patriots. That's it. The Dolphins right now in their dilemma. Fitzpatrick's out of the building. He's gone to Washington. That means that Miami is left with Tua. And here's what's so interesting about this. This is the kind of thing that is going to bash away all the trollers who continuously end up commenting on this. And trust me, I see this all the time. I will not voice it, but I watch it all the time, and it makes me laugh when I do. But the Dolphins have a dilemma. Okay, is Tua really the answer to their franchise for their future? Because right now, from what it looks like, the Dolphins did, in fact, get some good players. I mean, they got at least a couple good offensive linemen for protection. They also ended up getting some good defensive players, but they're going to initiate everything in the draft. But one thing's for certain. I mean, they're clearly going to need another wide receiver next to Devontae Parker. They need it. They need depth at wide receiver. The run game's good. Tight end, Mike Gesicki, he's going to turn into one of the top 10, top 5 best tight ends in the league. And he's something interesting to watch. I love his style of play, and I think the schematic that Brian Flores has works. The question of it is the quarterback position right? Because Tua's not someone that makes mistakes. We know this. But here's what's interesting about it. Tua, in the amount of games that he's had, he hasn't thrown for over 300 yards in a single game. What's also interesting is because a lot of people started bashing on Justin Herbert when it came to his performance in the NFL. And let me look at this right. Let me at least just give you some statistics here. Because to me, I feel like this is very interesting. But when I look at when I look at Tua, and when I look at every single possibility and every single potentiality with this team. I really do. So as I'm looking at it from this standpoint and from statistics, because looking at Tua from each of these games, okay, let me just show you since he started, okay, when he started against the LA Rams, his completion percentage was 54. And you know how many yards he threw? 93. In the next game against the Arizona Cardinals, he threw 248. He was getting closer. He was throwing for 169 against the Chargers, 83 against Denver, where he struggled and he got benched. He then ended up throwing 296 yards, close to 300 against Cincinnati, but it's Cincinnati. And then you had Kansas City where he had 316 yards. So then one time. And then you have New England where he struggled and he had 145. And then 94 against the Raiders. Then, of course, you had 361 against the Bills. So twice. But you want to know what's interesting about that is when you look at the completion percentage with him. I mean, his completion percentage, 54, 71, 60, 55, 66, 58, 76, 77, and 60. He's one that doesn't want to make mistakes. He doesn't want to make mistakes. I get it. He's coachable. But there are also times where you got to be a quarterback that's willing to take a risk at certain times. And I don't know if he's truly that guy that really likes to take risks. I mean, let's be honest here. If that's the case for him, Because overall, in his statistics, okay, he completed at least 196 passes out of the 290, completed 64%, threw for at least 1,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5 picks. It's not bad. It seems average. It really does seem like average, above average. But then when I look at, here's the split statistic now between him and Justin Herbert. Okay, Herbert in this case, he's completed 396 out of the 595 times he's thrown the ball. 66% completion, 4,300 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, 10 picks out of the 11-5 of Tua's. And you want to know how many times that he's thrown for over 300 yards? Well, let me just show you. Since he first started against the Kansas City Chiefs, 311. Panthers, 330. 290. 264. 347. 278. 326. 187. 366. 316. 209. 243. 314. 253. 302. How many times has he thrown for over 300 yards? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times over the 2 that Tua has thrown. And Tua's one that doesn't like to make mistakes. Justin Herbert is a complete game changer. He's a guy that is willing to make a play work. And I think with Brandon Staley, with his confidence at the helm, they're going to make this thing work. Tua, you have to make sure that everything is built to its best extent. That's the way you got to look at it. And if that's the case, then at that point, like, Tua's got to have at least the best. He's got to have the best quality system around. That's the way you look at it with Tua and with Miami. So at this point now, and think about it, Miami, they threw their chips in for Deshaun Watson. Why? Because Deshaun's got an arm. Deshaun Watson is a game changer. And I understand a lot of the things that are happening at this moment right now. But when I look at it from a sports standpoint, that's a guy that is willing to make some big-time plays. But if you give Deshaun Watson a secondary receiver next to Devontae Parker, that Miami team, that offense is going to be so good. Nobody in the East is going to want any part of that. Not even the Patriots, not even Buffalo, and not even the Jets. And that's how serious Miami was, and they were considering that. But what it feels like to me, if you're going to play this safe route, if you're the Dolphins, then honestly, you take a mulligan and draft a quarterback. If that's the case, if that's how they feel. Because right now, you don't want to be in a position where you're so unsure of how you feel with this Tua thing. And a lot of people have been talking about this over and over, if they trust Tua or if Tua's really the guy. I think Tua's got potential. I'm not bashing him. I'm not criticizing him. But from what it sounds like from the Dolphins, that if this thing with Tua don't work, they'll feel like this is a mishap. The Cardinals went through this. They went through this with Josh Rosen, and they went and got Kyler Murray. They went through the same similar situation. And it feels like that in this league, there is no time for developing quarterbacks. That's what it looks like. And so Tua has potential. But are the Dolphins really invested in that potential? I don't know. But the only thing I can tell you is if you go and draft a quarterback, I feel like that the quarterbacks that could fit this system would probably be Justin Fields, possibly Trey Lance, because they don't want a pocket passer. They want somebody who's willing to be up on the move, who's mobile, because that's what the trend is in this league. And I feel like Justin Fields, he's a guy that can throw at least a little better. He's a little more mobile and is a guy that's willing to, think outside the box when it comes to certain plays. And then you're also talking about the potentiality of Trey Lance. And I think Trey Lance has a damn good arm. But this thing with Miami right now and their uncertainty. And listen, if you're not sure or certain of a certain situation, then find something that's going to be better that could potentially save yourself. It could save yourself all of the hassle, all of the stress. Because at that point, if you're really pushing in all the chips, then the Miami would be in trouble. And Miami's done such a good job with their coaching, their defense, to now be in a position where they feel like there's so much uncertainty that they just cannot fix this. So if you want to make this work, then either work with this program or do yourself a favor and draft a quarterback. Because at this point right now with this Deshaun Watson thing, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. They're just going to keep them up there in Houston. Enough said. Time now for the hot press. So latest reports in the NBA right now, because the Houston Rockets, oh man, this is as terrible as it possibly gets. But the Houston Rockets are moving toward trading away Victor Oladipo. So, of course, last night, the Houston Rockets were in a position where they made history. They had their 20th consecutive loss already this season, and the Rockets are just a dumpster fire. What's going on, Farmer G? What's happening, man? Glad to have you on. But at this point, they are really progressing to trading away Victor Oladipo. Look, this isn't working for Houston, and Houston's just bad enough already. This is just bad. And we already knew this once James Harden was gone, Russell Westbrook is gone, Clint Capella is gone, Daryl Morey is gone. This Houston franchise is just a dumpster fire. So at this point, Victor Oladipo had been contacted by a bunch of teams, the Miami Heat, the Golden State Warriors, and the New York Knicks. So, of course, Victor Oladipo, he bounced from a bunch of teams. Of course, the Orlando Magic, which he started in his career, then eventually goes to Oklahoma City, then ends up in Indiana, and then goes to Houston. There's so many different possibilities for Oladipo, but I'm hoping for the absolute best and that he stays healthy. So I think that if he goes to, honestly, like a Miami group, I think the Miami group would be good because Jimmy Butler and Victor Oladipo, I feel like, would be on the same page. They'd be competitive. So to me, I feel like that's a real good potentiality, and we'll see what happens from there. So, Joe Flacco, by the way, who spent a year with the New York Jets, Joe Flacco now has signed a 1-year contract with the Philadelphia Eagles to back up Jalen Hurts. This is going to be interesting. So, Flacco's getting a 1-year, $3.5 million contract with the opportunity to earn $4 million in incentives. So this is now the quarterback depth chart. Jalen Hurts, Joe Flacco, Nate Sudfeld. And a lot of people right now are starting to have the conversations of, is Philadelphia going to draft a quarterback? Why? This is such a bad ran franchise. It's a mess. That the Philadelphia Eagles, even though that they need a depth in quarterback, at least one piece, this is going to be Jalen Hurts' team one way or the other. They need to fix wide receivers. They need to fix their defense. They need to fix their offensive line because it can't stay healthy. And this is a bad scenario right now for Howie Roseman and for Jeffrey Lurie because now you've gotten rid of your star quarterback in Carson Wentz. Doug Peterson's fired, and you're bringing in a new head coach that he butchered his first interview. This is going to look like a Philadelphia nightmare. And ultimately, nothing against Average Joe, but he's Average Joe for a reason. And I just feel like that if this is the potentiality and if this is the case, the Philadelphia Eagles, they're just going to be in an entire spiral of messes. I don't care what anybody says up to this point, But this is going to be a complete mess for the Philadelphia Eagles. But I'm optimistic about certain things. But this is a good thing for as far as the backup. But let's just see now what the Philadelphia Eagles do in the coming days. So, by the way, here was what was interesting. So Trent Williams, before he signed a contract extension with the San Francisco 49ers, which they did bring back a lot of really good players. Trent Williams says he was so close to a Kansas City Chiefs deal before the 49ers got him a contract. They got him back with a big-time recording contract. So here was what was interesting. Of course, Kansas City needed to have an offensive line. So the record set was 6 years, $138, with a $55 million guarantee that was from San Francisco. That was the record-setting deal. Now, as far as what the Kansas City Chiefs were willing to offer, I'm sure it was an offer that Trent Williams really could not refuse. But this is the point. Kansas City now, they're needing their offensive line. They're needing a better defense. And they got exposed last year. They got exposed in the Super Bowl. And that's one of the reasons why Kansas City's doing all of this with their offensive linemen. I am very surprised that, for one, I was like, oh, Trent Williams, they may be going close to a deal. But then at the end, San Francisco nailed their starting tackle. They were able to get him there. But this is interesting for me. This is a very interesting scenario. But again, one that was willing to be close, and everything else with as far as, the contract negotiations go. So I thought it was interesting, but it is telling you how competitive that the Kansas City Chiefs really are getting when it comes to these contract negotiations. So, So I thought I really, really think it's interesting. So I think, for one, like, because the 49ers right now, they're going to be a tough team in the NFC. It's clear. And they're bringing everybody back. Like, that is specifically and precisely what it's going to be looking like for them. But they'll be very competitive from there. So, at the very least, Trent Williams, he's back as a 49er and won't be going anywhere else. So, good news for the 49ers. All right, that was your hot press. I was really looking into this, and when I was on the Turn 2 podcast, I thought this was very strange. But, of course, MLB on Fox, they sent out these fan-voted these fan-voted stuff where, like, the fans vote onto this bracket and stuff like that. And I thought this was really, really interesting. But I looked at this bracket. So, of course, there's 4 brackets up in here. And each and every one of them are all based upon fan bases. This is really interesting. So you've got, in the first bracket, Braves, Mets, Reds, Rangers, Brewers, Phillies, Diamondbacks. Right now, the top teams are the Braves and the Brewers, because the Mets, the Brewers, the Phillies, they make it through, and then the Braves beat the Mets, the Brewers beat the Phillies. That's what you're looking at from there. Yankees, Indians, Orioles, Tigers, Pirates, Red Sox, Rockies. So it became the Indians and the Yankees, and the Indians beat the Yankees. That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Now you had the Tigers beating the Pirates, then the Red Sox beating the Rockies. Red Sox beat the Tigers. Now it's the Indians and Red Sox. If the Indians beat the Red Sox, it doesn't get. Here's the other thing. Here's what gets better. Bracket 3: Dodgers, Marlins, Royals, Nationals, Astros, Rays, Giants, A's. Dodgers beat the Marlins. Nationals beat the Royals. Dodgers beat the Nationals. They're in the spot. Rays beat the Astros. Giants beat the A's. Rays beat the Giants. And now it's Dodgers, Rays. here's what's so interesting. The Yankees fan base, like the Cowboys and a lot of these big time franchises. And I understand this is a fan base thing, but this is ridiculous. And when I look at fan bases and when I look at fan base empires, the Yankees, the Cowboys, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Lakers. I mean, good God. This is absolutely absurd. That when I see the Indians beat the Yankees, if the Indians beat the Red Sox and the Rays beat the Dodgers, I'm going to have a lot to say about that. Because you're telling me, the Indians, what exactly was big on their franchise? What has been big on their fan base? Because listen, Cleveland, the Cavaliers right now are not the most promising organization. The Browns are getting better. Okay, and then you have the Indians, which they're hot and cold. They're without Francisco Lindor. They have to trust everything in Shane Bieber and Jose Ramirez. They got to put up real good productions. And the Indians, they're feeling more like a middle of the pack type of team in the Central. That's it. At this point, if you're looking at this right now with this fan base and the Tampa Bay Rays, let me tell you something. Okay, Tampa Bay, they're big on the Buccaneers. They love the Lightning. And then you have Tampa. You have the Rays. And what's interesting about this is when they were franchised in 98, okay, they were a team that was known as the Devil Rays. This was a throw-in. It was doing Bud Selig a favor from George Steinbrenner because he was he resided in Florida, couldn't get up there to New York amidst the cold weather and all this other stuff. But he chilled out in Florida. It was like retirement vacation. So instead, they threw in a franchise, and then just so they threw him into the division that the Yankees are in so that Steinbrenner could watch the Yankees in Tropicana Field. That was what the initiation was. Now, they did have some guys like Wade Boggs, James Shields, Jason Bartlett, Carl Crawford, Carlos Pena, BJ Upton. Then when they were the Tampa Bay Rays in 2008, they then got Evan Longoria, Ben Zobrist, Akinori Iwamura, Deanna Navarro. They had a lot of really good guys. But at that point, Tampa's fan base was only starting. But as far as Empire fan bases, Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers, if the Rays end up beating the Dodgers in this fan base thing, I'm losing it. Because the Dodgers have been kings of the West Coast. Not to mention, the East Coast is also filled with a lot of Dodger fans. I know this too. The Dodgers brand has been big since Brooklyn and is still big in the West Coast and Los Angeles and so many other West Coast states. And that's the fact. That's the reality. But when I look at this now with as far as them against the Rays, the Dodgers beat them by a mile. How did the Indians beat the Yankees? The Yankees would have beaten the Indians by a mile. It honestly should be the Yankees, Red Sox, empires, both going against each other in the fan bases. That should right there be the matchup. But instead, we're getting this. I'm not putting in all my energy, but I find this so curious. Like the curiosity. Here's one thing. There were a couple of upsets on this bracket. Cubs-Padres. The Padres beat the Cubs. How? The Padres, their only big rant and rave is because of this Fernando Tatis Jr. thing, which nothing against the kid. I think he's great. But that should honestly be the big-time start of a fan base. And I also understand this with this fan base because the Chargers left San Diego and they went to Los Angeles. All the fan base stayed with the Padres. And then you had Trevor Hoffman, you had Tony Gwynn, you had a lot of real good players up there in San Diego, and even Ken Caminiti. But then since then, now you have Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis Jr., Eric Hosmer, Will Myers, Jake Cronenworth. You have guys now. That should be the start of the fan base. But that should not basically say that's a bigger fan base than the Cubs. The Cubs fans live and breathe Cubs baseball. They've been doing that for centuries. And they last won the World Series in 2016. It took them 109 years just to win a World Series since they won it in 1908. Isn't that amazing? When I look at some of this stuff and I look at some of these fan bases, because to truly be a fan base, I mean, you got to have at least the amount of fans that live and breathe this, live and breathe the team. And there are a bunch of them that I know that when it comes to their regions and when it comes to a lot of the locations, I know for a fact they're a big-time franchise. Why? Because you'll always see their brand in every general store. Yankees, Dodgers, Red Sox, partial Giants, and then a partial amounts of any other organizations. St. Louis, the Cardinals, and a bunch of others. You're going to see those there. But if you had to think of an entire empire, Yankees, Dodgers, Red Sox, those are your three big-time empires. The Cubs, I mean, it's crazy to think like this. But this is exactly what I feel like with it. But this is such a crazy fan base. I mean, I could not stress it enough. Because to me personally, like I'll make it a best for last for me. So since I saw this, again, I look at these fan bases. This is what I would have done. So here's where I'm going to redo this whole bracket. So I'm going to do this bracket tiering one. So as far as the fan bases goes, because you got the Braves that are on a bye, you have the Mets, Reds, Rangers, Brewers, Phillies, Diamondbacks, right? So I do agree with the Phillies over the Diamondbacks because of the fact. What's going on, Xander? I do agree with the Phillies over the Diamondbacks. Listen, the Phillies, Philadelphia is a hardened town, and they love the Eagles. They love the Flyers. They love everything Philadelphia. The Diamondbacks, the one thing you have to understand and realize with the Diamondbacks is that you have them and the Phoenix Suns. And the Diamondbacks, when I look at Chase Field, it's a fun stadium to go to. It's a fun stadium to watch baseball. You got the pull side out there in the outfield. There's a lot of really good spots. I'm not going to lie there. But Philadelphia, from their histories and from a lot of just like their big time fan bases and the fanatic, that's the big thing. So I agree with that. Rangers over the Brewers. I have to say the Brewers. The one thing I like about it is because, I mean, look, you got Bernie Brewer, but here's the other thing. Bob Uecker has been such an amazing voice in baseball. Between him and Vin Scully, those are and Harry Carey and Hawk Harrelson. Those have been by far the best announcers there for baseball. Okay, and we all remember Bob Uecker when it came to Major League. And he had been calling games for the Milwaukee Brewers. But then you also have the time when the fan base was big when they had Prince Fielder and Ryan Braun. And then you also have Robin Yount at the time. They even had Raleigh Fingers when he came in from the A's and went to the Milwaukee Brewers. And this was back when they were an American League team. But when I look at the Texas Rangers, I mean, the Rangers had a good fan base, not a great one. Because even though they made it to back-to-back World Series from 2010 to 2011, they had some really good players. Nelson Cruz, Josh Hamilton, Ian Kinsler, Elvis Andrus, Adrian Beltre, Mike Napoli. The lineup was stacked. And then you had the pitching staff that needed help. But the way that I look at it from this point, I mean, definitely the Brewers. definitely the Brewers fan base from there. Mets and Reds. Who doesn't love Mr. Met? Because to me, I look at this from this entire bracket, and the Mets have a lot of really good history. Tom Seaver, Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden, David Wright. The other real good part of it as well is also, Darryl Strawberry, Gary Carter. They had some really good players right there in their histories. And the Reds, Cincinnati's very strange in an interesting way, because Cincinnati, to me, you got the Bengals, you got the Reds, but if I had to look at this from the Reds standpoint, there's part of that where I think you are seeing the Cincinnati Reds for their fan base, but the other part of this is, you had Pete Rose, you had Eric Davis, you had Joe Morgan, you had a lot of real good players, and even Barry Larkin and Sean Casey. So there were some real good players for Cincinnati's end. But as far as from the historical standpoint, the Mets, the 86 World Series, and the Buckner boot from Mookie Wilson, by far, Mets for sure. So that leaves you with Braves, Mets, Brewers, Phillies. I think, personally, I'm going to start with this with the Brewers and the Phillies. I feel like it's so neck and neck between the two of them, but I probably would have to go with the Phillies. Phillies do have a World Series. Brewers do not. They're still waiting for their World Series championship. They were both American and National League. They didn't end up getting a championship. And that was difficult and tough. But they've had a lot of really good successes. But the Phillies, they have a championship. Mike Schmidt, when it came to his home runs, the unbelievable rotation when it came to the late Roy Halladay, Roy Oswalt, Cole Hamels, Joe Blanton, and a bunch of others. And then you also had Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Pedro Feliz, Placido Polanco, Carlos Ruiz. You had at least a decent outfield with Shane Victorino and Dominic Brown, and a couple of other good players. And you even had Jason Worth at the time. This Phillies team had some competitive teams, but I really do think they beat the Brewers because of that World Series. As far as the Braves and the Mets, I've got to go with the Atlanta Braves over the Mets. This might end up, boiling one of my good colleagues, Jeff Hammer. But the Braves, here's the thing. I don't care what anybody says. The infamous chop is one of the most infamous sounds and chants in baseball. And you hear it from a lot of different places. The Braves are not changing their names. They are not even changing any of their logos or anything whatsoever. So get over it, folks. It's baseball, for God's sakes. And ultimately, it's a tradition. And so when I look at the Atlanta Braves, they've had histories. My God, Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, and they had Fred McGriff. They had a bunch of really good players. Javi Lopez at one point was such a productive catcher. Then you also, you come around. I loved watching Andrelton Simmons playing shortstop. I loved watching a lot of these guys, Chipper Jones and Andrew Jones. This Braves organization, they've had histories of really good players. Hank Aaron, and a lot of Eddie Matthews. They had a lot of really good players over the years with their franchise. But for the Mets, it's unfortunate for them in that particular aspect. But the Braves, they do have a very competitive franchise. So if I had to think of the winner between the Phillies and Braves, I got to go with the Braves. Got to go with the Braves. Braves have had at least a little bit more historical memories than the Phillies have. The Phillies, you looked at since Mike Schmidt, they've only had a couple of good players. Braves, since Hank Aaron and Eddie Matthews, they've had a ton of really good players. And Bobby Cox was legendary. I mean, nothing against Charlie Manuel, but Bobby Cox was a very legendary and well-respected manager in the game. So I think the Braves have absolutely won this with bracket 1. Bracket 2, Indians, Orioles, Tigers, Pirates, Red Sox, Rockies, and the Yankees have the bye. Of course, the Indians would beat the Orioles organization with that much because Major League. This was also a team that Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, CC Sabathia, Cliff Lee. They've had a ton of real good players. They just could not seal the deal. My God, it kept carrying on even in the 16 World Series. They had a 3-1 lead and they choked. And Corey Kluber, they overused him a lot. But that team was good. That team was good. And for the Orioles, the only thing is Cal Ripken Jr., the Iron Man. Nobody on the face of this earth could ever top that at all. Then you also had the 71 Orioles when you had Jim Palmer, McNally, a lot of, you had the 20 games in the rotation, like 4 of the 5 in the rotation had 20 wins. Outside of that, the Indians, like they've had a lot of histories. And then of course the movie Major League. So the Tigers and the Pirates, this is interesting. But the Tigers, I think, have a better fan base than the Pirates do. Now, there's nothing against the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Pirates do have 2 World Series. You had one, which was the Bill Mazeroski home run that beat the Yankees. You had the year when they won it with Willie Stargell, and they had that funky uniforms with the black and yellow. And then, of course, you had the year when they had Andrew McCutchen. They had Andrew McCutchen, Garrett Jones, Starling Marte. They've had a lot of real good players over the years. But as far as Pittsburgh being competitive, they were kind of up and down. They were not showing their best potential. But the Tigers fan base, they've had Gaylord Perry. They've had Jack Morris. They've had Kirk Gibson. They've had a lot of real good guys. They won a World Series. And then, of course, you talk about the Maguila Ordonez home run that sent them to the World Series in 2006 against the Cardinals. Miguel Cabrera, Triple Crown. They get to the World Series in 2012, and they did absolutely nothing. But Miguel Cabrera, best hitting player I'd ever watched, and watching him win the Triple Crown in 2012 was special to me. I knew exactly what they were getting at with that type of player. I mean, this is a guy that won the World Series with the Florida Marlins in 2003, and man, was he something special. Red Sox, Rockies, it's no doubt. It's the Boston Red Sox. They have clearly more history than the Rockies do, even though the Rockies had at least a fair share of history. Andres Galarraga, Vinny Castilla, Ubaldo Jimenez, Matt Holliday, Troy Tulowitzki, Nolan Arenado. They've had some good histories, but what's the problem with them now is that they get rid of all their good players and they don't build. They don't build. They build, but it's not the type of building you think it is. So they struggle with that massively. So the Red Sox win this one big time. So I look at the Yankees, Indians, Tigers, Red Sox. Yeah, over Yankees and Indians, I'm redoing this. I'm going with the Yankees because that is a fan base nobody can touch. It's an empire. So the Indians, I was very distraught by this because the Yankees have always had a history. I mean, my God, they've had a history that's gone on for centuries. Babe Ruth, Reggie Jackson, Thurman Munson, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford. Don Larson's his perfect game. The history goes on. Derek Jeter, do I need to go on? They've got a much bigger history than the Cleveland Indians. Are you out of your mind when it comes to that? It's ridiculous. Tigers, Red Sox, it's clearly the Red Sox. Red Sox have more World Series wins than the Tigers do. And same thing when it comes to their history. They've had a curse and they've lifted the curse. So now it's between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And I'll be honest with you. This is a hell of a rivalry. And if I had to think of a winner with this, I'm going with the New York Yankees. I love watching this series. I love watching this rivalry. This is the best rivalry in baseball in history. And that's one that's the most exciting because the Red Sox have had their moments where they toyed with the Yankees. They've even had, the Yankees have even had some times where they toyed with the Red Sox. And that's always been old school rivalry. It'll never stop. It'll never end. That's the way that it looks. And so to me, bracket 2 winner is definitely the New York Yankees. All right, we're going to bracket 3. Dodgers, Marlins, Royals, Nationals, Astros, Rays, Giants, A's. Here's what I'll look at with this. And I find this very fascinating. But the Dodgers, of course, they beat out the Marlins. The Marlins had 2 World Series with 97 and 2003. But the Dodgers have always had a history. They've always had a history that dates all the way back from the Brooklyn Dodgers with Jackie Robinson, with Gil Hodges, Pee Wee Reese. And then fast forward, Sandy Koufax, a lot of these real good players. The Marlins, they've had Gary Sheffield. They've had Edgar Renteria. They've had Hanley Ramirez, Miguel Cabrera, Josh Beckett. They had a couple players. They've had a couple of them. And then the other part is, the Marlins with Giancarlo Stanton was always fun to watch. Watching him hit those home runs in Marlins Park, that's about it. The Dodgers have more history than that. I can't stress it enough. All right, Nationals and Royals. This is kind of interesting for me, but I'm kind of surprised with it, but I am going with the Nationals. There's nothing against the Kansas City Royals. The Royals they've won 2 World Series for one. Or actually, you know what? I'm going to flip-flop. I'm going to go with the Royals over the Nationals. My one thing is, Royals win 2 World Series. They were not such a competitive franchise, but they did have Brett Saberhagen, George Brett, Bo Jackson, because people never knew about Bo the second he came in. And then, of course, you had that terrific Royals 2014 run. They were at least 1 game short against the Giants. And then they win the World Series in 2015 against the Mets. The Royals finally done it. That was a team that was so competitive that they utilized so much of small ball. I loved it. That was where I loved watching baseball because it was all situational play. Astros, Rays, kind of surprised by this, but if I had to look at it from a historical standpoint, I'm going with the Houston Astros. Because here's the thing. The Tampa Bay Rays were in 1998. And as I mentioned before, George Steinbrenner did Bud Selig a favor at the time. They bring a franchise to Tampa Bay, so it was closer for him to watching Yankee games. Check. The Rays had a bunch of really good players, still do with their pitching staff, but not a long enough history. The Houston Astros were always known for those ugly uniforms, the Astrodome, Towers Hill, and then not to mention Craig Biggio, Jeff Bagwell, Carlos Beltran, Billy Wagner, Andy Pettit. They've had a lot of really good guys. Lance Berkman was another real good guy. Hunter Pence. They've had some notable guys. And then I know a lot of people laughed at that franchise because they were no longer competitive, but then they turned things around in the American League where now you have Bregman, Correa, Altuve. You had Springer at the time before he went to Toronto. And this team clicked and they got competitive. And it was one that a lot of Houston fans were waiting for, but they were Astro fans. And I just feel like they had a bigger fan base than the Rays do. Now, this is a tough one, Giants and A's. But I feel like, to me personally, and it's nothing against either one because it's a neck and neck, but I'm going to go with the A's in this one. The Giants, here's the thing. The Giants franchise, they've had notable players. Mitchell, Barry Bonds, Will the Thrill Clark. They've had a bunch of guys. JT Snow. Barry Bonds was initially what was huge of that fan base. That was the biggest rant and rave of that fan base. Then the fan base got bigger because of the fact of Buster Posey, the 3 World Series in 5 years. But let me just tell you about A's history. The A's have been such a competitive franchise since they've ever existed. Now, they were the Philadelphia A's during the Connie Mack years, and when you had Jimmy Fox and a lot of these guys, and Jimmy Fox was the first Triple Crown winner, and he was a hell of a player. Philadelphia won championships. They then moved to Kansas City, and then they moved to Oakland, where they were the Oakland A's. That's what started the birthplace for Carney Lansford. That also started for Reggie Jackson, Raleigh Fingers, Catfish Hunter. There were a bunch of really good star-studded guys, and they won back-to-back-to-back, 72 to 74. Okay, that was not the easiest. It was not the easiest for them because they were also fighting with their front offices with Charlie Finley. That was the hardest thing that they ever had to do. In fact, the players didn't even want to play because they were backing up one of the players that was getting thrown under the bus by the front office because of one error. That was what was huge about history. And then the 1989 World Series between the A's and Giants. And here's what's interesting. That was when the huge earthquake hit. But you had Ricky Henderson and Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco. You had a bunch of really good guys. And over time, the A's have been such a competitive franchise for years. And then Moneyball happened. So don't get me wrong. The Giants fan base is good. But again, the A's have a lot more history than what the Giants do have, respectfully. So that leaves Dodgers, Royals, Astros, A's. Dodgers are beating the Royals because the Dodgers have a lot more history still. The A's, same thing with the Astros. The A's have more history than the Astros do, and they were more competitive in their own division. So that leaves the A's and Dodgers. If I had to really kind of think about this neck and neck, I'm going to go with the Dodgers. The Dodgers are winning this bracket. And listen, the Dodgers and A's, 1988 World Series, that was the most exciting World Series to watch because of Kirk Gibson doing the impossible. You had Dennis Eckersley, one of the best closers in baseball. At the end of it, the A's, they still are trying to win another World Series since 89. And the Moneyball thing has been working for 20 years, but it has not won them a World Series. The Dodgers are fresh off of a World Series championship this year. And it's interesting. But as far as their franchise goes, Orel Hershiser, Mike Scioscia, Davey Lopes, Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Bill Russell, there were some really good cats there. And the Dodgers have had a buckload of history. So they're winning this bracket here, and they're the bracket winners. All right, so then that's bracket 4 now, finally. It's the Cubs, Padres, Angels, White Sox, Cardinals, Twins, Blue Jays, Mariners. Cubs, Padres, I'm putting the Cubs up on here. I'm sorry to burst your bubbles right now, Padre fans, but here's the thing. The Cubs fan base has been around for centuries. And They were around until they won the World Series 109 years later, since 1908. And they've had so many players come and go. Kerry Wood, Andre Dawson, Ernie Banks. This was such a big-time franchise. The oldest franchise and the oldest ballpark in history, Wrigley Field. Over 100 years between Yankee Stadium, Dodger Stadium, Fenway Park. Wrigley's right there. That's a big ballpark history. Sorry to burst your bubbles, San Diego, but you're still a fresh franchise. You have Petco Park, which is the nicest ballpark to go into on a summertime in San Diego. They had Trevor Hoffman, Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn, one of the most legendary hitters I've ever watched play. You had Ozzie Smith at one time when you had those browns and golds. They bring him back again, but everybody's ranting and raving about Fernando Tatis Jr., which I love the kid, but this is way too early for this. This is way too early. Angels, White Sox. As far as history goes, I'm going with the White Sox. The Angels right now, I mean, they won a World Series in 2002. And you can't even remember who the first fish was, Tim Salmon. Tim Salmon was a really good player. Then you had John Lackey. Then you had at least a couple of other really good guys. Troy Glass. Mike Scioscia was the man when he was managing. And then not to mention before, the California Angels, the Anaheim Angels. Anaheim, when we watched Jim Edmonds play, that miraculous catch that he made in the outfield before he went to St. Louis. That was probably one of the best catches I've seen. But the White Sox, the Shoeless Joe Jackson scandal, the ugliest uniforms with the shorts and the collar tees. Good God, who wore that? Carlton Fisk. There were a bunch of real good players. Bo Jackson ended up going to the White Sox initially afterward during the tail end of his career. The 2005 World Series championship for Ozzie Guillen, Scott Pasednik, AJ Pierzynski, Paul Konerko. There were some real good guys. The White Sox have some real good history on their back end of their franchise. Cardinals, Twins, definitely the Cardinals. Look, nothing against the Twins. The Twins had some real good years, especially the 1991 World Series championship with Kirby Puckett and a bunch of them. I loved watching Chuck Knobloch play. They also even had a time where they had Michael Kadire, Jason Kubel, Joe Mauer, Alexi Casilla, Scott Diamond, Carl Pavano. They had some good players. Don't get me wrong. But their history was not as deep. It was not as deep. Even though they did have Harmon Killebrew. And for the Angels, too, they had Rod Carew, one of the most awkward, but yet probably one of the most finesse batting stances and batting swings we've ever seen in baseball. But the Twins having Harmon Killebrew, and they had some good players. But the Cardinals over the years, Stan the Man, Lou Brock, they even had Bob Gibson. The Cardinals have a stretch of history. And then not to mention the Mark McGwire 70 home runs race. And, they had Scott Rowland at one point. They had Albert Pujols. These are in Yachty. These are some good years out of St. Louis. And they're only getting better from there. And the fan base is strong in Missouri. Between St. Louis and Kansas City, St. Louis is strong up out there in that Missouri County. Blue Jays, Mariners. I'm sorry, but I have to go with the Blue Jays. There's a thing about this with the Mariners. The 2001 Mariners was probably one of the most fun and watchable teams I've ever seen. Ken Griffey Jr., Jay Buhner, Joey Cora, Edgar Martinez, Randy Johnson, Ichiro. These guys were good. These guys were so, so good. And then they faced off against the Yankees. They then had to, it was overcoming a lot of things. And that was hard. That was tough. But ultimately, when I look at this franchise, the franchise still hasn't won a World Series. And they're in the longest postseason drought since that year. It's been years for the Mariners. I don't know what direction they're going. But the Toronto Blue Jays, you had the Joe Carter 3-run home run. They won back-to-back in 92, 93. Dave Stieb was such a good player. You had Carlos Delgado, Shannon Stewart. You also had Tony Fernandez. These were really, really good players at the time. Roy Halladay was such a fun player to watch at Toronto at the time. You had Vernon Wells. At one point, you had Jose Bautista, Edwin Encarnacion. Toronto was really rocking it. But, yeah, that's the way that I looked at it. So you got Cubs, White Sox, Cardinals, Blue Jays. Between Cubs and White Sox, this is tough. But I am going with the Cubs. Battle between both North and South. They don't like each other. I remember when AJ Pierzynski threw that punch at one of the players. That was the most competitive baseball games I've ever watched, where these guys were throwing fists and they were fighting. And to me, the Cubs, over their histories, they've had a lot more players than what the Chicago White Sox had. And a lot of people bled Cubs colors more than White Sox, I'll be honest. But again, that's battle of North and South. You were either in North town of Chicago with the Cubs or you were in southbound with the White Sox. There was no easy way out of that route. Cardinals, Blue Jays, it's definitely got to be the St. Louis Cardinals. Hands down. More history, more World Series. They've had at least a little bit more successes than what the Toronto Blue Jays had. So then that's going to leave the Cubs and the Cardinals. This is a difficult one because Cardinals have more World Series. Cubs only have a little bit of championships, but we don't go back that era. Then you have the players. I feel like, to me, when it comes to fan base, I feel like you're gonna get Chicago. I mean, the Cubs. So the Cubs, to me, like, nothing against the Cardinals. They've won more World Series championships. That's not the idea. But the Cubs, you see Cubs fans left and right. They love being there at the ballpark. It's an experience and a half. You're down up in there in north of Chicago. You're getting deep dish pizza. You're getting Chicago-style dogs. You're getting all this good stuff. So that leaves the Braves, the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Cubs. So if I had to think of the semis between the Yankees and Dodgers, well, let's get to the Braves and the Cubs. So if I had to think of real good franchise, fan base wise, this is a tough one. But I've got to go with the Cubs over the Braves. That's not the easiest. That's not the easiest decision. This is one that, again, tradition itself. I mean, the Braves have won a bunch of World Series, and they're a very competitive team. Can't deny that. They've had a lot more histories. But this is one that I think when you date back to 100 years in Wrigley Field and all the memories that you have of it, Harry Carey, like, the Cubs fan base is crazy. So they're in the final. That leaves now the Yankees and Dodgers. Ooh. I think for me personally, I've got to go with the Yankees. Yankees have had this is an even balance of players over the years. the two of them have always been a rivalry, the most expensive franchises in baseball history. One that we've always wished to see in a World Series again in modern times. I mean, they're pushing for it. But the Yankees have had the historics of 27 World Series rings over the 7 that the Dodgers have. So 20 more. But the Yankees have had their fair shares of where they were winning championships, they were winning pennants, and they've had a lot of household names. The Dodgers do too. But ultimately, when it comes to fan base, I just see a lot of this there. Now, it varies because of the fact of regions, because the West Coast region, parts of the East Coast, you'll see a lot of Dodger fans, but you'll also see a ton of Yankee fans everywhere. It's the Yankee Empire. So that leaves the final between the Cubs and the Yankees. So my final between both these historic franchises, I feel like the best fan base has to be the Yankees fan base. People could say Yankee fans are obnoxious. People can say that this and that about Yankee fans. But Yankees fans in the Bronx and everywhere else have been so faithful for the team because of the fact of they're the big empire. People can love them or hate them. But they are, in fact, the franchise that people watch. I went to my first Yankee game when I was 6 years old, and I loved being there in Yankee Stadium. There was nothing like it. And to me, there was history all over it, and I was able to walk on the field. There is nothing like the Yankees or Yankee Stadium. Nothing. And again, these are two historic ballparks. Wrigley Field over 100 years. The New York Yankees have been around since the house that Ruth built in 1923. And then you had the old Yankee Stadium from 2000, until 2008, where that was the final season of it. And then they redid it, and then they had a new one. But if I had to think about that with as far as the history goes, yes, the World Series, and then, of course, the players, and, of course, the longevity of the franchise. The Yankees are tops. The Yankees are tops. There is no question about that. So, again, this is my personal fan base, but I feel like it's right. So, Braves, Mets, Brewers, Phillies, the Braves and the Phillies, and then the Braves win it. Then you have Yankees, Indians, Orioles, Tigers, Pirates, Red Sox, Rockies. Yankees would obviously beat the Indians after the Indians beat the Orioles. Tigers would beat the Pirates. The Red Sox would beat the Rockies. Red Sox would beat the Tigers. Yankees would beat the Indians. And then the Yankees would beat the Red Sox. Dodgers, Marlins, Royals, Nationals, Astros, Rays, Giants, A's. Dodgers would beat the Marlins. Royals would beat the Nationals. Astros would beat the Rays. A's would beat the Giants. Dodgers would beat the Royals. The A's would beat the Astros. Then it would be A's, Dodgers. Dodgers would end up beating the A's to winning the bracket. Cubs, Padres, Angels, White Sox, Cardinals, Twins, Blue Jays, Mariners. If the Cubs would beat the Padres, sorry to burst your bubble, San Diego. The White Sox would beat the Angels. Cardinals would beat the Twins. Blue Jays would beat the Mariners. Then it's Cubs, White Sox, Cardinals, Blue Jays. Blue Jays would beat the Cardinals. Cubs would beat the White Sox. Cubs, Cardinals. Cubs would end up beating the Cardinals to winning that bracket, and then you would have the Braves, Cubs, Yankees, Dodgers. Cubs would beat the Braves in their fan base. Then you would have the Yankees beating the Dodgers, and then you have the Yankees, Cubs in the championship. Yankees would end up winning would win the fan base. I'm sorry, folks, but again, when you're talking about that many, championships all at once, and again, the only thing that really intrigues me is that when I looked at that with the fan base, I was like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me if you're thinking that the Rays are a bigger fan base than the Astros are. You got to be kidding me that the Indians are a bigger, better fan base than the Yankees are. That's kind of ridiculous. And then you go and basically tell me that, the Padres are better than the Cubs. Come on. We're talking about historical franchises here. Fan bases that have been like almost for like an eternia. That's the way that I look at it when it comes to baseball. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I thought, to me right here, this was fair. This was fair on all perspectives. There is no question. But that's honestly what I feel like was the potentiality. So, alrighty, guys. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me here on the Snake Sports Talk Show, and I will see you guys next week. And by the way, the giveaway, I will be having that started in April. I thought I could be able to get it there on the time of my birthday, but unfortunately could not. But starting April, and we'll run it till April 15th, that will be the giveaway. So have a great night, everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you guys next week on the Snake Sports Talk Show on the Spotlight Sports Network. Have a good night.